you must know yourself as formlessness, not as an idea about formlessness, not as, because that implies form. All thoughts, all memory is form. And it's one thing to come into direct awareness of oneself as formlessness, as being inextricably in union with everything, therefore. And it's quite another thing to have an idea about it, to then take that awareness and objectify it, turn it into experience, turn it into memory, turn it into thought, and therefore regurgitate it with ideas and notions like, I am formlessness, right? Because it's one thing to directly be aware of the fact that I am formlessness. It's another thing to then take that direct awareness and objectify it and turn it into a thought. And then turn that thought into another philosophy that then gets used to hide from reality, to hide from what is, or to use as a weapon in combat, psychological combat, warfare. What we're talking about really is the ending of all warfare inwardly. And what that means then, really, to be aware of formlessness as formlessness and to see its eternal nature, and therefore to be aware of the eternal laws of consciousness. Because consciousness is eternal, and there are eternal laws which are manifestations of consciousness, or the eternal is governed by immutable, unchanging, eternal, you could call them laws, that's one of the best words that we have. The Sanskrit word that describes this is dharma. And that word is tricky to translate into English. It's sometimes translated as law, or religion, or I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it to you to do your own sitting with that. But dharma is called dharma because it's eternal. That's the meaning of it. So the immutable laws, the eternal laws of nature, therefore of consciousness, of formlessness, therefore of, you could call it God if you would use that word. But before we get hung up on words, one must come into direct awareness of it and see what it is, really. Because it's a great relief, to put it lightly. Because to be aware of oneself only within the realm of form, which is illusion, one first believes oneself to be the body and the mind, and therefore subject to birth and death. And of course, the body, being form, is subject to birth, obviously, and death, obviously. And all form has a beginning and an end, not only in immediate space-time. You know, here's the hand, right? It has a top and a bottom, a front and a back, and a side and a side, right? it's subject to being a cube, right? All physical reality that can be known directly by the mind and the senses has a top and a bottom, a back and a front, and two sides. Obviously, formlessness suffers no such constraints. And everything that is form, it has its immediate physical beginning and end, right? Its physical constriction, limitation, which is a requirement for its manifestation, its physical appearance. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. It has its birth and its death. That means the construction and the destruction. And either you see it or you don't. It's either visible to you or it's not visible to you. Those are the physical constraints of form. The three axes, which comprise the 6 walls of the cube. To put it another way, and this is now pertaining to the psychological awareness, either something exists or it doesn't exist. Physically, right now, in this moment. Either something is manifest or it's not manifest. It exists or it doesn't exist. Not concerned with whether something did exist or whether it will exist, because in the unmanifest, everything exists. We're not speaking of the unmanifest. This is called being clear. In terms of the manifest, the physical reality, that which is manifest, right now, in this moment, something is or it is not. That means it exists or it doesn't exist. In this moment, no projecting. It is or it isn't. It exists or it doesn't exist. Either you know or you don't know. And if you can simply hold on to that one, you've got everything. Either you know or you don't know. Period. There's no gray area there. None whatsoever. And if you can't be clear about that, you're doing yourself a great disservice. Living in total self-deception. Either, and this is an add-on to the first, or the second, I suppose, but it must be said, either you're honest enough to be able to admit that you don't know, or you're not. That's all. Something exists or it doesn't exist. You know absolutely, or you don't know. And either you're honest enough to admit, to say that you don't know, or you're not. Done. Period. That's all. And if you can hold that much integrity, that much honesty, you can't be deceived. Neither will you deceive yourself, nor will anybody or anything else deceive you. You see through everything. That's called being, well, let's not say quite yet what it's called being. But let's just be clear about it. Form must be seen in its true light. It must be, otherwise there will be no clarity and no capacity to perceive the formless, which obviously can't be seen with these two eyes. Formlessness is seen with the inner eye, with the eye of truth. Isn't that easy? It's easy. If you see this much, you see everything. Everything will yield. So first you must see the difference between form and formlessness without playing games with yourself. We're in too deep, and it's too dangerous here to play games with yourself. This is not a place for self-deception, which is another way of saying being clever. This is not a place for philosophy or speculation. This is a place for total clarity of perception. Nothing else is good enough. So, first you must see the difference between form and formlessness. And in seeing that, you see the eternal nature of formlessness, that it has no beginning, no end, therefore it's infinite, eternal, therefore not conditioned, what you could call pure, and therefore it is totally still, and if you look at it for yourself, you see that it's totally dynamic. It's the source of everything. It contains everything. Everything that ever was, that is, or that ever will be must arise from it and must return to it. It is intelligence itself. And when you touch it directly, when you know it directly for yourself, you know it as peace. Perfectly unperturbable peace. And you know this unperturbable peace to be the truth of who you really are. This, and another name for it, is consciousness. Pure consciousness. Awareness. Birthless, deathless, eternal, everywhere. That which is the substance of all things. And therefore you see then the relationship between form and formlessness is that all form is made of formlessness. And obviously then all form is temporary, which is another way of saying illusory. And therefore you see that, well, we'll get there in a minute. Now you must see the nature of form, which means form has a beginning and an end, and therefore a birth and a death. And in the realm of form, either you know or you don't know. There's no in between. Either something exists or it doesn't exist right now. Either you know or you don't know, absolutely. And either you're honest enough to admit that you don't know, or you're not. All form has a measurable beginning and end here in visual time-space. It has a birth and a death, its lifespan, and either you see it or you don't. Right? It's binary. All form is binary. That is, it exists within the realm of duality. But formlessness is non-dual. Unipolar. Formlessness is unipolar. Form is bipolar, or non-dual and dual. And non-duality has its eternal law, its eternal nature. And the word for this in Sanskrit language is called dharma. And all form has its dual or bipolar nature, and the word for this in Sanskrit is called karma. So, to see the difference between the two, really, not to deceive yourself with silly philosophies, to see the difference between the two. And then to see that all form is made of formlessness. And that all formlessness, then, is form. All form is known, let me be clear, all form is known as formlessness, truly. So that there's no actual division between form and formlessness. Actually, there's no actual division. But you must see at the same time the difference between formlessness as pure formlessness and form, as that which begins and ends. And this requires total sobriety of mind to be able to hold all of this without confusion, to see it without confusion, to see formlessness as formlessness, to see form as form, and to see form as formlessness. And the formlessness of form. To see this with clarity, without any self-deception or confusion, takes total sobriety. No self-deception. And no desire to use any of this to have power over anybody